There we are. Thank you for that reminder, Marvin. In any event, so, you know, Heather's been on the front lines for a long time political organizer and strategizer. She's a democracy partner. She ran the outreach to progressives and seniors for Biden, but her resume is vast, and we'll spend the next 90 minutes going through it if I tick off every item. Marvin, also longtime organizer with the NAACP, SEIU. He's also a democracy partner, ran 15 million in IEs in the last midterm and ran Stacey Abrams' IE in her first run for governor. Marvin and I also worked together to build a highly innovative project in 2020. Will Robinson, longtime progressive political consultant, probably one of the most persuasive people in the country, and also very behind the scenes. But his real claim to fame is that he does whatever Heather tells him, and he saw Elvis after his death. So and then I'm Suzanne Turner. Some of you know me, some of you don't. I run a progressive public affairs firm that will turn 21 in April, if you can believe that. And yes, hello, Sasha, longtime partner, Turner. And we run these Turner Talks every 2 or 3 weeks on topics that are important to the progressive movement. So thank you for joining us. Heather, I'm going to pass it to you.
Well, Suzanne, I am so glad to be on this. My movement partner, my wonderful movement sister. We've worked on a number of campaigns together in the past. Look forward to it in the future. And thanks for convening this call. And for Will and Marvin, I have learned from, admire, and partner with you, my movement brothers. There's no one in the movement that I admire more than the two of you. So look forward to learning from you on this call. And for all of you who are on this call, you are the answer to the question of what is our concern now and what is that we need to do. We need to organize. And when you know that when we organize, we can change the world. We have changed the world. We did it before the last election. It seemed as if it was Trump was going to win. In fact, we won the presidency, won the House and Senate by small margins. And we know that an opposition is more motivated when they feel they've lost. So the opposition is more motivated now. It is up to us, though, to change that motivation issue and to do the organizing. And we can do this. We know right now, as Suzanne said, that there's a pretty sour mood in the public. People are dispirited, and even dispirited in the movement itself, which is one of our greatest concerns. And it's understandable with COVID. I personally vaxxed and boosted. I had COVID. There's isolation, there's rising prices. The voting bill didn't go through. Build Back Better hasn't yet gone through, though we will get it. The next generation is on it. And even now there's talk about a potential war in Europe. Who knows what the heck that will mean.
Why is it not working?
And Ari Clemenzi, can you put your phone on mute, and maybe Suzanne? Yeah. Okay. And so we're up against a difficult climate. In fact, the polls now don't look great. There was one poll that said that Biden was at 41%, and one even said maybe even a little lower. And historically, a president needs about 46% in order to get reelected. But there are other elements that we also want to emphasize that say that there is a path forward. When there's a real matchup between specific candidates, Biden, in fact, matches up more favorably against any real candidate that he might be up against. And the options are better for almost every toss-up race in the country. The Republicans now, who have contested primaries, because many of our key races are where they're Democratic incumbents, they're not all of them. And the Republicans are beating themselves up because they are, as one pundit recently described them as, a crop of loons. And everything bad they say about each other is true, and we have to magnify that and say the truth to the American public. On Build Back Better, which I've been working on, and many of you have been working on so hard, it is still likely there will be a slimmed down version, and we will deliver for the American public on lowering prescription drug prices. You know, people now often pay $1,500 a year for insulin. It will go down to $35 if, in fact, we pass even a slimmed down version, childcare, elder care, climate. and making the wealthiest pay. And then the reality will change. Spring will come, COVID will diminish, inflation will lower, supplies will return, but it is up to us. Just one other figure I want to leave you with before we open it up. Pew just did a poll a few days ago and said that of the people who didn't vote in the last election, they support Biden over the Republicans by 50% to 35%. Our job is to ensure that those who are considering not voting turn out and vote, that those who voted for us before do vote, that we do both persuasion, turnout, mobilization, voter registration. It all starts now. And it depends on how you, as many of you are communicators, how you spread the word and the organizing we do. And when we organize, as William McNary knows and has often told me, when we organize, we have changed this world. Robin Parker knows this, and we will change this world. I turn it over now to my partner in the progressive movement, Marvin Randolph. Oh, Marvin, you're on mute.
Thanks so much, Heather. And just wanted to say again, just how honored I am to be a part of this conversation. And it's always a hard thing to follow the amazing Heather Booth, but I'm going to try and just like frame things up a little bit for some of the dimension that we want to bring to this conversation. And so I just want to start with, Heather talked a little bit about the mood of the country and where we're at, the different fights that we are engaged in and where we're at in those fights. But I want to remind us of what we learned from history. I want folks to travel back for a minute to November of 2020 and that January afterwards, where suddenly we found that we'd won a presidential race. We won the Senate back. And that January, we saw this amazing victory in Georgia, as an example, with Reverend Warnock, who, if you'd have gone back a year ago and said, is Warnock the person to run? Not many people would have been excited about that, but I think you could make the argument in Georgia that the victory of both Senate races, all those things wouldn't be possible without Reverend Warnock being on the ticket. But if you go back further, you look at what was built in Georgia with what Stacey Abrams started to build, which led to now a state that has 95% of the people in that state that are registered, just a ginormous thing. And so there's a piece that I will reference a little bit, and Turner is going to work to recirculate it, that I wrote about a year ago this time, talking about what Georgia tells us about what is to be done. And I'm going to leave you just with a couple of thoughts about that. And the first is this: elections are about math. And it's how you look at that math and how you lean into that math that makes a difference. There are a number of places, and Georgia is one example, and there are many others that we'll talk about, where a group of progressive leaders banded together to build something in that state that created the environment where that math worked to our advantage. I want you to think back in history. I remember I was at a party once, and I was having a conversation with someone after the 2016 election loss, and they were challenging me when I was talking about how we need to invest more in motivating and turning out our base, in addition to the stuff we do with persuasion. And they said, well, 2016 race, tell me 3 states where it could have made a difference if we'd have done that. And I said, easy: Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Think back to the 2016 election. If we knew that the fate of that election would hang on 80,000 votes in 3 states, those 3 states, and had to decide where to direct critical resources, where would we lean into that map? So the thought I want you to be left with is this, is that there are, in fact, more of us than there are of them. In more states, in more districts, and more municipalities, if you look at the base that we have, and whether you're turning out infrequent voters or registering new voters, and what's possible. And some of the states that we're going to talk about a little bit are Wisconsin, North Carolina, Florida, Georgia, Pennsylvania, where they're very hotly contested Senate races. So I don't want to spend a lot more time going to that idea. I want to leave plenty of time for you guys to ask questions and turn it over to the guy that taught me everything that I learned about political campaigns from a pup in 1988, the amazing Will Robinson, who is the architect of the modern coordinated campaign. I know that because Will trained me to do it.
Thanks, Marvin. So what's a media consultant doing on a Zoom presentation with two of the legends of organizing? Well, it's because the future is not about broadcast television or TV ads or campaign ads. It's about organizing. And let me tell you why. We are going through an amazing technological change in America, whether it's cell phones or people not answering their phone, digital. But what's also going on is broadcast television is disappearing. Nielsen's been tracking it, and last week, 22% of all videos were viewed on broadcast and 28% were viewed on streaming. 11% on cable, and everything else was the internet. And the problem is that in politics, especially Democratic politics, we're still consumed with 1,000 points of television. And to be honest with you, 1,000 points of TV barely exists anymore. It's really hard to get 1,000 points of TV because people aren't watching television. If you think about it, when's the last time, besides a sporting event, that you watched live TV on broadcast? We used to go home on a Thursday night and sit in front of the TV set and watch NBC all night. And now, you're looking at your mobile device and that sort of thing. The problem is, Chris Cillizza posted an article over the weekend that $100 million has been spent on the top 5 U.S. Senate races already this cycle. $100 million, most of it on television, and twice as much of it is on television than was the same time in 2020 and 2018. The other thing that's going on is we're in an absolute news desert, and people aren't getting news, whether it's the newspapers or broadcast television, whatever. Last night, only 19 million people watched the evening news, 19 million households in America. And local TV, only 3.7 million watched local television. So we're in this huge news desert. And whether it's counting on newspapers to get through or counting on our broadcast ads to get through, it's not working. And what we need to do is organize. And if you think about it, people who are talking about politics, people who talk about campaigns, when you listen to them, the first thing you're thinking is, who is this person? Second thing is, what are they saying? The third thing is, can I trust them? And our problem is relying too much on broadcasts and that sort of thing, and not enough energy put into recruiting people that are trusted messengers, having conversations with the folks that they know. And one of the strategies of the disinformation machine is to find people who are confused and surround them with people that are misinformed. And the old adage that if you hear a lie enough, it becomes the truth. And that's exactly what's going on right now. So I guess my role here is we've got to shift our priorities from spending money on broadcast to organizing, and even a small percentage of it put in organizing right now, because I learned from Heather and Marvin, you can't start organizing 3 days before the election. Now it's the time for us to start organizing. We need to do it now. So I'll stop my proselytizing, but I just want to get some bonus points for a media consultant who says, stop doing television.
And I want to comment on something Will said, because he was the first person who underscored, from a communications point of view, underscored the importance of other forms of communication other than TV. The first person I remembered when it was a sort of a shocking note, and also emphasized the need for organizing. So I also want to follow Will, and as an organizer, emphasize how the organizing needs to be combined with the communications and the messaging, which Will so effectively, and Marvin and Suzanne and others on this call know we need to do. But I want to make a couple of points about the communications pivot that we need to do now. So far, most of the news has been Biden's not succeeding. The Democrats are fighting against 2 senators. Is it cinema? Is it mansion? Is it, we're not getting anything done. The world's going down. And then people hear about a stolen election. There is about to give us a big opportunity for this pivot. The January 6th commission is going to have not only live hearings, but will expose in much greater detail that there is a criminal conspiracy. There has been a criminal operation in what was not only the Trump operation, but the entire MAGA effort. And that was designed to deny us the freedom to have fair elections and to let our vote count. That's what they were trying to do with a military attempt to take over the election machinery. And there will be one after another opportunity to change and pivot this message. It's a reason that Trump, in his last rally, I think it was a Texas rally, where he said that if elected, not only will he pardon any of the people who are charged out of the January 6th insurrection, but he also said he'll go after those people who are prosecuting, and he mentioned specifically in Georgia and Atlanta, New York and DC. And first of all, he's going after, in all cases, they're African-American prosecutors, but also they're all the places where he is going to be charged. It's very important for us to take 2 tracks at least in our future messaging. One is to clarify that the main force of this criminal operation is the MAGA. It's bigger than Trump. And it's coming after people's freedom. And the second thing is, as we get ready to move forward on a slimmed down version of Build Back Better, which we still believe will be one of the most important investments we've had in our future, and that we are delivering for the American public. So there's both a positive vision, but we need to get the word out, and a clarity on who are the real villains of this operation. And the heroes are the American people who can fight back, but the way to fight back is to vote, and for those in our movement to be involved now.
I just wanted to build on something that Heather said that, and will allude to, that's so important. And that's that if you want to learn something about the political terrain that you're in, pay attention to what your opposition is doing. You know, the opposition, the party that we're fighting against, has spent a tremendous amount of time, people, and money doing what? Suppressing, depressing, and repressing the vote. Why? Because Republicans may not have read many things, but they read the census. And they know that there's a shift that's happening in this country that they can't stop, but they can slow it down. So everything they're doing is trying to pump the brakes on that. And as progressive and as Democrats, we should realize that we should be pushing the accelerator everywhere that we can, because, you know, it's just, as I started out by saying, elections are about math. And if you pay attention to how the numbers have started to shift, the tale sort of tells itself. And the wake-up call that I hope that people get in the progressive movement is to take example from places like Georgia, or some of the things that are happening that are similar in North Carolina, or that began in places even like Alabama, where people spend a tremendous amount of time building a tight-knit coalition of organizers that weren't just trying to just win elections, but they were trying to build a movement that could sustain it. And so, you know, part of a piece that I wrote a while back talked about how overnight change takes 10 years, but it doesn't have to. And that's a little bit of the story of Georgia. That's a little bit of the story of some of these amazing victories that you've seen. And so I just want to remind us to pay attention to what our opponents are doing, and we should be leaning into that math ourselves too.
Will, did you want to say anything else before we opened up for questions?
No, but I'd like to reserve the right to revise and extend my remarks later.
So we open the floor for questions. I'd like to ask that you state your name and your organization. So some of us may know you and some of us may not. So let us all get to know you. direct your questions to whichever of the panelists you'd like to have answered. And if people get tongue-tied for questions, then I have a list too. So I'm going to open the floor right now.
You know, as you're opening up for questions and as people are thinking of what you want to ask or offer, I notice on this call really some of the most extraordinary leaders in the movement. I saw Drew Weston's on the call, who I hope he will share with us some of the most insightful messaging that has recently been developed and his insights on how we can move forward. Or David Elliott's on, who's been a communications director. Bill McNary knows him for many years. Karen Mulhauser, who's been in politics, understands the women's lay of the land and much more. So rather than mentioning the name, oh, Toby Chaudhry just came on. So Toby, we've been talking about communications and organizing and the need and how we find a path forward. So we'd love to hear from all of you.
I'll start with the question. Hi, everybody. I'm Sasha Burns. I'm with Turner. When you read and look at the numbers of what's been going on with unemployment, with the economy, and how well Biden has done, why is that not getting through? Why do people not know that? Because I don't think that they do.
Will, do you want to take it on a communications level?
So I think there's two things. One is the progressive movement and Democratic Party are run by too many goddamn high school debaters. And we think this is about winning an argument. And that a lot of our messaging is based on, you know, facts and figures and whatever. And it's not about winning an argument. It's about making connections with people. And looking at, and it's no criticism, and I'm doing some of the work too, a lot of the Build Back Better stuff is $18.7 billion and 14 billion and whatever. And I think the stuff that's really impactful are stories, and that we have been around campfires telling stories for 50,000 years. And Dr. Drew Weston can tell you the portions of the brain that get activated by narrative and the emotional impact and the motivational impact those areas of the brain do versus our frontal lobes, which is the, you know, facts and figures and all that kind of stuff. So we need to be able to tell stories. And what is really tragic in some ways is what Joe Biden has already done and what he's about to do is some of the most incredible transformational policy in the history of this country. And it's at FDR level. And we need to find people to tell that story. We're one of the only countries in the world where we don't have the ability for people to take care of their children. People are playing, you know, musical chairs to take care of their children. And God damn it, he's doing something about that. He gave people a check for their kids and put money in their pocket. So I think that part of it is we need to figure out how to do that. And a part of it's also doing it in the right way. And again, you know, TV ads, unconnected, are just words floating out there. And while they're floating out there, some media consultant's getting money in his pocket. I'm done proselytizing.
I'm going to step in and proselytize for a moment.
I want to say something else to add on to what Will said. And that is that when we have the stories, and we do, from Moms Rising, from the League of Conservation Voters, Bob Bingham's on from Sierra Club, there are extraordinary stories of what's been done and the impact on people's lives. But we need to know that repetition is our friend. By the way, repetition is our friend. I don't know if I've told you this before, but repetition is our friend. You know, McDonald's says you have to see a McDonald's ad 7 times before you know you saw the ad. And then you don't even know what it said. And a friend of mine, a friend of many of yours, Dawn Lee, who's now working on how to deal with what used to be called vaccine hesitant communities. She said it's 15 communications. And then people change.
Right.
And we think you say it once and it's done, and we don't have the unified messaging. They've clearly got from Fox News and Rogan and Tucker Carlson, and we have a fractured operation. So moving that more together. And there are dates coming up I want to share with you in which you as communicators can share these messages. At least 2 dates. On February 8th is the Child Tax Credit Day. And we have to indicate what happens when we cut child poverty nearly in half, but it's going to escalate again because we didn't make it permanent. But we can tell those stories of what it means to have gotten that support. February 23rd is a Care Can't Wait Day. And there are hundreds of organizations that will be focusing on these particular days to drive these messages. There also are other days, but they're kinds of things we can all do and join in together on. And Suzanne, back to you. I'm sorry, you were about to say something.
So I just wanted to make the point that the right wing are not high school debaters. And the right wing knew that Biden was coming in with a historic agenda. There are all sorts of different reasons we knew that this was going to be so. And so what did the right wing do as part of the campaign in 2020? Their big, tremendous resources have been spent to convince the country that Joe Biden is a doddering, falling in the grave old fool. If I drive outside of DC in any direction, 25, 30 minutes, there are FU Brandon signs everywhere. And when I drive through portions of Pennsylvania and other places where I know that there are important legislative seats up for grabs, there are giant highway signs with Joe Biden dressed as Taliban, and heavily in places where a lot of people have been our service members or veterans. So they're not arguing the facts. They're trying to make the argument about something completely different, which is what we know about messaging.
So I'm just responding to Carrie's comment in the comments chat, is that 2 things. As Heather said, apparently this repetition thing is really important. 256,000 mentions of CRT, LGBTQ+ in the governor's race in Virginia from Labor Day to Election Day. 256,000 mentions. And that in order for us to become effective communicators, we have to go down the long tail. And it's not just like, Twitter or whatever. In my buys I'm doing now, I used to buy TV and cable. Last week I did a buy. I had 17 media platforms that I was buying. Some of them are 6-second ads, some of them are 15-second ads. But also what we need to do is build this organic platform. There are bots that attack us and Republicans, but there are also hundreds of thousands of Republican activists that are online, and that we're not online. We're not doing that, and we're certainly not communicating to anywhere besides our base.
Well, do you want to talk all about your online, offline organizing project?
So we are working right now to recruit people online on the Facebook groups. And these are groups where we are getting people to talk about issues, have discussion about issues, but it's being done in a respectful way. It's being done with some management of protecting the site from trolls, profanity, threats, that sort of thing. And that part of our problem is, and this is a deliberate strategy from the right, that they not only amplify their people and make them angry, but they use this anger to attack our activists. So how many of us have met somebody who said, I know this is really an important election, but you know what, I've had it. I just can't take this negativity anymore. And the idea is to try to help people with that. And there's also safety and support in numbers. And when the right wing goes to these school board meetings, first, 3/4 of the people who are there aren't from that area, but they go in groups. And one solitary person or two people when they're getting yelled at by 30 people. So again, it's organizing. I can talk more about it offline if people are interested. I don't want to talk very much about it in public, but we're looking for people to help us with this. But we need to win this conversation by conversation, but you can't win conversation by conversation unless there's an element of organizing.
Just to add to that, just one of the things I learned early on is that, elections, campaigns are battles of definition. They just are, they're not about numbers and stats. They're about emotions. They're about what connects to people. And when you're trying to convince someone of something, the three things that you have to take into account: the message, what you're saying, the messenger, who's saying, and the medium, how you're saying it. And we can talk to it blue in the face about how different mediums work, whether it's doing a television ad, doing a Facebook ad, or something that's digital, knocking on a door, doing a phone call. All of these mediums have different pros and cons, but the most important part of any message is the messenger. And as well alluded to, having the right people telling these stories about these issues is what makes it cut through to folks. Having people that are approachable and that folks feel like are relatable, repeating that message, as Heather said, so that there's a repetition, a loop of repetition that's driving it through and getting through to folks. I mean, I think that part of what we lose sight of is that, we have to make sure that we have the right people that are mouthing these arguments that we're making that are about emotions and not just about numbers. It's lauding those accomplishments in smart ways that aren't debate club techniques, as Will said, but things that touch people's heartstrings.
So Carrie Moe has a question, and Carrie, you ready?
Yeah, and sorry everybody, I'm outside and I've got a dog around me. So thank you, Suzanne, and thanks for organizing this and the panels. So I have a question related to a follow up on Will's point about organizing in addition to communications, and that's organizing as part of campaigns. And we haven't really been in the field since 18. We went from in-person door knocking to remote because of COVID. And in the last specials, we were kind of hybrid, but we've also lost in the interim, we've lost a huge amount of data in that state parties and state organizations have for who's moved, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just curious about, folks are talking about how to get back in the field, that we need to get back on doors. We need to have in-person conversations and take them to scale as we did pre-COVID. And I'm just wondering what your guidance is about that. Are we moving in that direction? Is, what guidance is being given to candidates and committees and folks working, the supportive organizations? Can we and how should we best scale back up into the field in person to win this cycle?
One word about it, and also a word about Carrie Moe, who was the chief of staff for Paul Wellstone, for Keith Ellison, for Chuy Garcia, and is also in Democracy Partners, now working with the Progressive Caucus of Congress. And so when she raises a question, it's really important. I also do, by the way, see, just to tell you, Danielle, we see your hand is up, and there may be some others. Looks like Maggie Goldman may be wanting to say something. Maybe one comment. There are now one of the reasons. Marvin, Maggie, it looks like there's feedback from you. Maggie, it looks like there's feedback from your
Repetition.
So, but from different voices, as Marvin says. Marvin ran part of the extraordinary field operation around the Georgia and a number of the Southern elections, and Marvin can talk more about it and what was the model. But part of the reason it was successful is there was an extraordinary door-to-door canvass operation in addition to what the coordinated effort had. but was also organized by Unite Here, the remarkable trade union. I just was on a phone call with a number of them, and they are now training up people who are going to be involved in the elections again, door to door. Working America has a door-to-door operation, the community arm of the AFL-CIO, the Turnout Project, the Progressive Turnout Project. And there's one group after another. And so the need, you're exactly right, Kari, but there is an increased understanding about the need to actually have human connection. There also has been greater understanding about not just texting and phone calling, but forming an ongoing relationship with people. And what's now called the relational organizing, it's not so much that it's new, it's what William McNary taught us many years ago. It's the building a relationship with a set of people, 5 people, 10 people, and sticking with them through election day. Are you registered? Did you vote? How's your mom? How are you? Oh, you got COVID? That's really terrible. I can bring you over some food. And by the way, are we registered? And so, Kari, I do think there is much greater emphasis on it. I don't know about it from the other institutions you described, and I don't know if Will or Marvin have something on it before we go to Danielle.
I can just say that I think that relational organizing is something that we need to really adopt, and we do some of it, but we don't do enough of it. Facebook is evil, it's ridiculous and whatever, but 68% of Americans are on Facebook at some point during the week. And as one of my friends said, if something's on fire, you need to go to the fire to put it out. So we need to go there. And, you know, Instagram's for some younger people. But I was talking to a canvasser, and she said that she has a list. She goes down the street, she knocks on doors of people she doesn't know. 2/3 of them don't answer their door anymore, or a dog's sick on her or whatever, and she got 12 IDs in an hour. She's like, I have 600 people I know on this thing. Why aren't I talking to these people as opposed to going down the street? And I think you need to do both. And, you know, people can make a decision to open the door, but I think that you need to do both. And that's where we need to be heading. And that part of our problem is that I don't think that we have made the transition to adding the relational organizing in the mix of voter contact techniques. Just like media, one thing's not enough. So it's relational organizing, canvassing, texting. The one thing I would say, though, is that phoning, I think, is just about dead. Our connect rate on phones is 3%, 4%. There may be some relational phoning that can do, friends calling friends, but we're still in this mindset. Like, I made 400,000 attempts on an auto dialer, and we made 400,000 phone calls. It's like, great. How many households did you get to? 48,000. Okay. How many IDs do you have? 4,653. I didn't use a zero there. And, you know, that's our attrition on this phoning. And I really think that, you know, we need to use the other part of the phone to help organize, not just the phone part of the phone. And Maggie, I think there's a number of them. And, you know, one of the things with Suzanne's permission, this has been a great discussion. I like to take a discussion, continue it, and part of it could be like, let's compare what are the best apps. But I think that the most important thing about relational organizing is the relations and the connections you make, not necessarily, you know, what app you're using.
Great. Danielle, you want to ask a question?
Sure, I want to ask about 18 questions, but let me try and focus.
Okay,
So I'm Danielle.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm Danielle. I'm talking to you from Brooklyn, New York, and I have a media marketing background. So you're speaking to my heart there, Will. But I also have been involved in housing advocacy recently, the past couple of years, and also have worked in a lot of different local campaigns. But so there's a lot of what I'm having questions about. And just to address the relational one, I agree. People aren't answering their doors. There has to be ways of building community, maybe even using Zoom to have like regular things that people feel like they can be comfortable just jumping in on or something. I don't know what the answer is, but people are definitely not answering the doors. But I guess more my question was, I feel it's not just about messaging in terms of being on the offensive and creating and cultivating messaging, but also being strategic about how to undermine and be on the defensive. And I feel, especially with the housing advocacy lately, there's just stuff that gets out there and it's not challenged in a way that's very focused and effective. And to act like, oh, there's certain legislation going on right now in New York State. Oh, they don't like, how could the conservatives not understand what this legislation is about? And they're talking about, universal rent control. I won't get into like legislation, but it's good cause eviction stuff. But it's not about universal rent control. So that message has to be combated and addressed, and not just like go back to the messaging that we want to focus on, and I felt the same way. And there's certain campaigns I've worked on, I felt the same way. It's like, okay, well, you're being presented with this argument and you're not addressing it and coming after it. And I feel that's a frustration, and it leads me to encounter lots of younger people as well who say, what's the point? Which is another aspect that I'd love for you to hear more about from you guys. So hopefully I bundled that into like, not 18 questions, but more discussion.
Who would you like to hear from on your question?
I mean, I think the main question is offense, defense in terms of messaging. And so whoever wants to jump in, and then like ideas about other ways to build relations.
I mean, I think it's not necessarily a situation of either or. And that one of the things that I wasn't going to talk about tonight, but I will, is the other thing that the Republicans are kicking our ass on is their definition of audiences. And that we as Democrats are mostly still looking at audiences as defined by demographics. So blue collar men, non-college women, and that this is really limiting a college educated woman, a woman who went to Bryn Mawr, a woman who went to Michigan State, and a woman who went to Liberty University. I posit that perhaps they might have different worldviews, okay? But technically, they're all three college educated women. And that what many of us are doing is now segregating these conversations out by people's belief system. Progressives, conservative, people are anxious, authoritarians, blue collar doubters. And that some of these conversations could be on the defensive with one group and on the offensive with another, or back and forth. And I'm really, I'm a good progressive, and I was taught the Paul Tully model, which was you run a campaign, but it's kind of command and control. And I think what we need to do is release control a lot more and train people and activate people at the local level to organize and know what the appropriate conversation is for the individual, whether it's a positive conversation or a defensive conversation. I would ask Suzanne, maybe one of these Turner talks, let's talk about psychometric targeting and behavioral, because I think a lot of you know this instinctively, but it's a difference between us putting voter coalitions together with cinder blocks and the Republicans using mosaic pieces. And they use these different sets of voters to underscore. So it's like, why we keep on losing blue collar women? Because they know that all blue collar women are not the same.
Right. So who else would like to ask a question? I'm not seeing any hands up in the chat.
I'd be curious what Marvin has to say about what the question.
First off, I think you're right. I mean, I think that if you're talking about like offense or defense, it's not a question of either or. I also think that we have to be creative in how it is that we're talking to people. I mean, no matter how you choose to communicate with someone, there are pros and cons to that medium. Like I can tell you, Will was talking about like the response rate with phones and things have definitely changed. One of the things I do is we do live calls. Like I've done like 11 million calls in the past like 6 or so years, but the math with that is it's pretty stark. I mean, if we call a landline, only 50% of the people that we call are going to even pick up the phone. if you call a cell, that's probably going to drop down to 35 to 25% that are going to pick up the cell phone. And if you're asking people questions, maybe 70% of those people that you talk to are actually going to get through the first question. And so that doesn't mean that phones are absolutely bad for everything. It just means you have to be smart with how you're using it. If we were outside of this COVID window and knocking on more doors, one of the things that we do with phones is you can cover a lot of ground quickly, even though the numbers diminish really quickly, and you can make your canvas more efficient. But again, I want to go back to what Heather was saying, is that layering your messaging so that people are getting a repetitive message in a way that they hear it from a messenger that they can relate to, and it's over and over again. I mean, people remember Verizon, that annoying guy saying, "Can you hear me now?" over and over again until you were sick of hearing it. So I do think that we have to be inventive about that. And there are some things that I think are not entirely true. Like, yes, we are knocking on a lot less doors than we have, and for good reason. But my firm has knocked like probably about 6 million doors in the past like 5 or 6 years, and we have run very efficient door programs that were COVID safe with very few to no incidents because of how we ran it. But we have to adapt to the times we're in. And well, I don't know if that gets to what you were, sort of.
Oh, no, and I'm not anti-phone, and I think you made the good point, is that now that all these tools have changed, we need to figure out which combinations of them we use. But it's not just technology, it's what words, what emotions, what stories we tell using those devices.
Yeah, and as well, to the point you're saying, it's not like one medium is amazing and the other one is evil. It shifts over time. The way that people communicate changes, so the way we run campaigns change. Just like when I remember when we first started, what was like the back during the Kerry election, was it? I get that there was a point in time when digital campaigns were starting to become a thing, and every consultant was trained to say the internet is an improving medium. But now everybody's communicating that way. 68% of people get their information from their phones, and so we have to change with it. But Heather, you were about to say something. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Just to say, think about how you receive information and what makes a difference to you. When I hear something and someone starts with the values of what motivates them, I love my children, and seeing them at home, not being able, whatever the next part of the story is. I carry a picture of, these are my 5 grandchildren. I have it at the top of my desk because I want to look at them every single day. And so to tell, it's not just to tell the stories, but to say whatever the message, it's that we convey it with an emotional power that begins with the values we care about and the people we care about. And the two things that I feel are particularly important as we move, whether it's on housing, which Danielle mentioned is one particular issue, or whatever the issue is, it's to relate to people. And as Robin Parker knows, because she was one of the people who saved, was part of the saving forces in the Biden campaign and part of the 24/7 volunteers that we had working together in her extraordinary way. Almost every meeting that we ended, and some of you have spoken to before know this, that there were 2 themes that we kept repeating to ourselves in the campaign. And the first was and these were buttons that we made up for core volunteers who worked 24/7, is that if we organize, you'll see the Biden-Harris buttons. I don't know if you could quite see it. If we organize, we will change the world. You've got to do the work. You've got to organize. Robin has her button there, with love at the center. And I mention that because in a time of such hate and division, we need to expose the haters and show love and caring for each other. And I'd go on and say something broader that's more recently been a greater concern I have for our movement. This is beyond the specifics of organizing and messaging that we've been talking about so far. When the chips are down, it is common for movements and organizations to turn on each other. Oh, how could he be such an idiot? Oh, why isn't he just, oh, he didn't follow my advice. I knew the message. I wrote him a note and he didn't take my advice. There are all sorts of reasons things happen or don't, and sometimes we make bad choices. But we have to stay together as a movement. And I don't mean not providing the critique so that we can learn from it. But even as a movement, we need to stay together with love at the center and organize.
So I'd like to throw the conversation over to Dr. Drew Weston. Dr. Weston?
Yeah, thanks for putting this on. This is really wonderful. And I just wanted to make a couple of comments. I'll pick up on where Heather just left off about values and about just the difference in message that it makes and messaging makes, that when you start with values versus you start with the issue. And we hear about minimum wage all the time. This is just to pick one. If you start a message by saying we need to go to a $15 minimum wage, you're lucky if you're going to pick up half of Americans on that. If you start instead by saying, no one in this country ought to have to work 2 or 3 jobs just to put food on the table for their family. That's why we need to have a $15 minimum wage, because you know what $15 minimum wage is? Do the math. 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year. That's just a $30,000 a year income. That is the minimum that anyone could possibly get by on their family. If you do it that way, you get up to 65% right away. You just picked up 15%, and there's nothing that the other side can say that can beat that. I also just wanted to just go back and to the question that everything kind of kicked off with. The first question that somebody asked, which was about why, what happened to the why isn't President Biden getting the credit that he's due? And you'll look at, the administration passed an extraordinary first COVID/stimulus plan at the beginning. And it came back with an infrastructure act. But when you get to the stories and to the repetition, what are the stories and repetition that we've heard? The repetition we've heard over and over are the names Manchin and Sinema. We haven't heard so much about what is it that what is it? First of all, we haven't. I don't know about any of you guys. I haven't seen on television any projects where you see people who are getting the jobs from that stimulus act. Where are they? I mean, that should have been camera ready from the absolute beginning, so that at the second that was passed, you could be right in West Virginia and say, we got a project right here in West Virginia. We have all these coal miners who have been watching their jobs disappear while they've at the same time been having their lungs destroyed by this. Well, you know what? We have a project right here that's building solar panels right here in West Virginia, and the kind of jobs it is creates go off into the story. The instead of hearing the stories about reconciliation packages it's been all about process. Just one other thing I'll mention, then I'll be quiet again, is that the way it was packaged, and we've heard a lot about the mistake in describing in terms of $3 trillion spending package, but you couldn't do much worse in how you described it. And I understand that a lot of that was the media took off with that $3.5 trillion number and ran with it. But there's a way that we could have really avoided making this about, well, Biden says at one end of Pennsylvania Avenue, it's going to be 3.5 trillion. And Manchin says, as our second president, that it's going to be, 1.3 trillion. Yeah, if the messaging had instead been something along the lines of like this, we're going to spend $350 billion a year investing again in America and investing in American jobs. It's a fraction of what the Chinese are spending right now. If we do that for 10 years, we're going to put ourselves back on the course that we're going to have another American century like we had the last century was the American century. If we had done something like that, just if you think about the math, the way you present the math, $3.5 trillion over 10 years is $350 billion a year. $350 billion a year investment in America and in American jobs and in jobs programs that help people shift over from being co-workers to being solar technicians. You know, $350 billion doesn't sound like much. 3.5 trillion sounds like the moon. And that's the kind of thing that it just should be ingrained in our DNA, that the story you tell is about 350 billion and an investment in American jobs, American workers, and in America, again, the way other countries are investing. So anyway, it's the kind of thing that I don't know how we got so far off track on that. That's kind of messaging 101 about those numbers. We need to start getting that stuff
Also,
right.
I'd say tying it into people's own lives. By the way, Drew Weston is someone I go to consistently for guidance on. Oh, Janelle, you're maybe if you mute yourself or if you want to talk, that would be great. So Drew's
That's
wisdom
true.
has,
Can I ask Drew a question? So Drew, one of the things that Heather said is this idea of love. And I do a lot of work with teachers, and they are being attacked all the time. And one of the things I've been saying to them is, you know, what we need to talk about is teachers do this because they love their children. They love their students. They love children. What is this kind of meeting anger, not with anger, but meeting anger with love? What is that going on? What happens in the brain? How do we use, what's going on there?
Can I give you a somewhat concrete response to that? And that is, so I just finished, Heather has seen it, it's a project on how to talk about race and CRT and race in the context of what the conservatives are calling CRT. Our top message was a message that gets at just what you're talking about. It's a message about, good parents and teachers have been working together for a long time, and we've just been through this awful pandemic together. We've never seen teachers and parents working so closely together. This idea that somehow teachers think that parents don't matter. This is not the time to start letting politicians split up parents and teachers and putting them against each other. This is the time to start continuing to rebuild and to catch kids up from that lost year. That was the top message. But there was another one that was really, really race conscious. We tested 9 messages, and 8 really beat the crap out of a very strong, disinforming, dog whistling, right-wing message that I took a lot from the language of the other side. And one of the things that was most exciting about the race conscious message is it began by saying something to the effect that, we need to teach history the same way we teach math and chemistry as accurately as we can. And, when I was a kid growing up, we learned about Thomas Jefferson and about how he penned those immortal words about how all men are created equal. But we also learned about how the founders got it pretty wrong because they couldn't see how that could extend to either women or to African American, to Africans. Would I love to teach history that, about the people I really admire as if they were all perfect? Sure, but that wouldn't be history. And then we actually transitioned right into a message about Tulsa. And that message went straight up even with Republicans. But it's about the values scaffolding, like Heather just described. It was in introducing Tulsa. It was that we introduced it by saying, I want my kids also to learn about things I didn't learn about, like that massacre in Tulsa that happened that most of us just learned about for the first time. Here was a group of Black people in America who were doing everything right, and they were prospering for it, and they got massacred for it. That's not okay here. And in dial testing, the Republicans went up on that because they heard that and thought, well, that's not right. They were in fact doing exactly what we want Americans to do, which is to prosper and it picks up their values of merit and hard work, which are also, frankly, our values as well that we cede too much to the other side.
the general points that I take from this, whether you work on housing, as Danielle said, or critical race theory opposition, as Drew was describing, here are some principles to think of. One is to start with remember what your values are. Remember that you're talking to a real person, and how does whatever you're talking about relate to their life? And how can they make a difference on it? And then how is the opposition misleading, lying, and corrupting what they know is true? I wanted to give a few examples just from Build Back Better, which is one of the things I'm working on. Bob Bingaman is working on it, and a number of others on this call I know are working on it. I think Lonnie, and I don't see all the names on the.
I want to just flag something. What I'd like to do, and give you guys a moment to think about it, is I'd love for the panelists to ask some questions of the group, because we have so many accomplished people in this call. So there may be other people like Dr. Weston who have something interesting to say, but if the three of you could think of some questions you might like to ask from the folks on the call. So giving you a moment to think about that, and then finish your thought, Heather, sorry.
I was going to give just a few examples rather than just making it abstract, but it's likely there will be a slimmed down version of Build Back Better that passes. I gave the one example about the limit on costs of insulin, which is so widely used. There would be a $35 cap of cost sharing for insulin, and now it could be $1,500 a year. This is supported by 78% of Americans, including 64% of Republicans. Or on Medicare, giving them the right to negotiate with drug companies to lower the cost of up to 20 life-saving drugs. These are drugs that are used by 8.5 million people. This is supported by 79% of Americans, including 66% of Republicans. And there was just a letter sent around by frontline moderate Democrats who said, please pass this. We need this. This was not the Progressive Caucus versus a more conservative part of the Congress. It was saying, Susan Wild is the person who led that proposal, because it's something that we need, they've said, for their own constituents. It's what the American public need. So just as we think about that, and then once we have those points, to repeat and repeat. You know, there are a number of people on the call who have particular projects, just as Drew was talking about a project he's working on. I wonder if there are others who have particular projects who'd like to share them that have generalizable principles about a way forward. And I know Toby Chaudhry, with his beautiful child there, has been a communications expert for so many years. We worked together at Campaign for America's Future about 30 years ago. I don't know, Toby, and you particularly work in the space of social media and online communications. Are there any insights you want to share yourself for the group?
The one thing that I will say is, can you hear me?
Yeah.
It might be a little loud here. Is just elevating what has already been said about, especially this organic platform, and thinking about that platform as multi-platform. I mean, right now, there is something very powerful about how we connect with each other, how we connect trusted sources together right now, and amplify. And I feel like that's case in point right in this group right here, right now. But I feel like there's so much wisdom that's being shared in this room right now, that there's a clue in just this and how we're organizing outside of this, for what it's worth.
And with that insight, and I thank you for that, my square next to you is Karen Mulhauser, who has a project called Trusted Sources, or it's been called that in the past, and she had a particular insight and is pursuing it now. Karen, do you want to describe your project?
Yes, thank you, Heather and Toby, very briefly. This whole concept of relational organizing is one that I have been using for, I don't know, almost 20 years. And I've called it trusted sources, that people are much more inclined to respond to requests to get involved in elections if they're hearing this request from somebody they know and trust. So I have worked in the early 2000s with women's groups and with peace groups to have the heads of organizations reach out to their members and contacts to get involved in elections, to register and vote, to support candidates, to support their points of view. And as I said in the chat a little while ago, I never answer a phone call if it's from a number that I don't recognize or a person I don't know. And so phone banking is not as effective as it used to be. But if you're getting a call or leave a message, I'm calling from XYZ organization where you're a member, people are much more inclined to respond to that call and get involved. And so I'm a strong believer in what most people are now calling relational organizing, and I call trusted sources. And I am bringing together an effort, a partisan effort this year with partisan organizations to work to reach out to their members and contacts and support in some targeted states where there are candidates where we could win if enough people get involved in the elections. And I'll put my email in the chat, and I'd be happy to talk with anyone who has thoughts about this. I did this in 2020, this trusted sources approach with nonpartisan groups. And I just decided that's not as effective. It's as working with partisan groups. And so this year it's going to be different. And I'd love to talk with anyone and fill you in on my emerging plan for this year. Thank you, Heather, for talking about trusted sources. And thank you, Toby, for using that phrase.
Thank you, Karen, for doing the work. Will, I see you had a question for Laura, and then there's another area I wanted to raise, a different area.
Yeah, I think that one of the amazing things is the power of personal narrative. And Laura has gone through some really trying health challenges. I mean, more than that. But what's really amazing, Laura, is the power that you have when you relate your personal experience and your personal challenges to policy. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I just see you everywhere, and you're very, very effective.
Thank you. The check is in the mail. I feel like we all do better when we lead with the personal, when we aren't on a battlefield of issues that are disconnected from what people are seeing and feeling and hearing. And it's also really hard ground for them to fight us on, because if our opponents go after us personally, it only backfires in their faces. So that's why there are a few less US senators in the states that I have lived in, a few less Republican US senators. So, I mean, I think everybody has a story, and every issue has compelling storytellers. You just need to find the people with those stories and give them the resources and backing to tell those stories, because a lot of the opportunities I've had have been because I had relationships already, that I already worked in this world and already knew who to talk to. But there are all kinds of people out there with compelling stories that don't have those relationships, that don't know how to get in USA Today or on CNN or whatever. And so it's on us to find those people. And we aren't always necessarily the best spokespeople as the people whose lives are directly on the line.
So Marvin, one of the things that you were interested in talking about is lessons from Georgia. And I'm wondering if there's an overlap between personal storytelling and the amazing organizing efforts in Georgia.
Yeah, I think that, part of what worked so well in Georgia was some of it was around framing, some of it was around messengers. Like, so here's an example, like when people tell the story of how Stacey Abrams started out and built New Georgia Project as her first big nonpartisan effort, like what they did was they looked at the math in the state and they realized that there were an enormous number of people. Well, first of all, if you want to win a race in Georgia, usually Democrats have won with, Georgia and the surrounding areas, Atlanta and surrounding areas. But if you looked at all of the counties that are outside of Georgia in those suburbs, there was an enormous number of people who just didn't vote frequently. They weren't engaged. They were registered. Some of them were unregistered, but they just weren't participating in the progress. So if a campaign is a conversation with voters, how you start that conversation matters, which is the cornerstone of relational organizing. What Stacey's organization did was they went out to those places in rural Georgia, and they didn't start asking them to vote for a particular candidate. They didn't start talking about being registered. They talked to people about how to get access to the Affordable Care Act. They talked to them about an issue that they understood and that mattered to them. And that was like the cornerstone of how they began that conversation. And then as they talked to them about healthcare, they gave them a little bit of a civics lesson. They said, hey, the problem is not the president, it's your governor that's not accepting the money. And then over time, that conversation shifted to, well, if you care about healthcare, you care about these things, you probably also care about who your state delegate is, your state legislator is. Then they registered folks. And then when the storm came, there were people from New Georgia Project who knocked on the door or called people and told them where to go to be safe. So the cornerstone of that was that they were building a relationship with those voters. It wasn't just through the doors. It wasn't just through talking to people on the phones. It wasn't just through sitting in people's living rooms. It was communicating in different ways where they were taking advantage of trusted messengers. So I think that, we talk about relational organizing like it's a new thing, not the folks on this call, but in that movement, we do an awful lot. It's not, it's something we've been doing for the longest time with organizing. But, I think that a lot of folks look at Georgia and they look at where Georgia ended up being. They don't look at the journey from where they started and how they started communicating with folks. So the fact that the number of people that are registered in Georgia has grown substantially didn't happen by accident. The fact that the shift of the people that were participating in the election that changed the mathematics of that election, where more people in rural areas were starting to come out and vote, was because of how those conversations were approached. Messengers, mediums, trusted messengers, relational organizing, just repeated over and over again.
And as we're a few months out now from the funders releasing money, obviously, as we go into the states and into the districts, Marvin and Will, I'm just curious about what are the hot races, and Marvin, what are the lessons from Georgia that we should be looking at in specific races in specific states? And also, I think we have a couple of gubernatorial races that are a little bit scary, specifically Michigan, my notes, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. So I'd love to hear a little bit about specific races, Will and Marvin.
So well, I don't know if you have different ones you want to rattle off, but I think that some of the races where there are interesting candidates that are running, particularly around the Senate races that are like toss-ups. Wisconsin, Mandela Barnes is running in Wisconsin. It's a pretty exciting election. There's actually a primary around the Milwaukee mayor that we're doing some work around there. North Carolina, Sherry Beasley is running for US Senate. Sherry Beasley ran statewide for the state Supreme Court and actually got more votes than Joe Biden did in 2020. And now so it's just an example of a candidate that I think is inspiring for that community in a place where the math can be changed and should be changed. Florida with Val Demings running, Georgia, Warnock, Pennsylvania. It's a little bit hard to see who's emerging, but I know that between, Sherry Street and Senator Malcolm Kenyatta, that's an interesting race. And also in Arizona with is a toss-up race for the Senate with Kelly, right? Isn't it? Well, I'm pretty sure that's it. I mean, but those are some of the places that are on my mind in the where we got races that are sort of teetering on the edge and where the numbers play to our advantage, I think we stand a chance to win or hold on to seats.
So I just want to do a shout out to Karen for a second, that she was involved in directing me in one of my first political experiences of 1980, back in the old days of the Republic, and was working for a congressman. I think it was either my second junior year or my first senior year of college. Not too sure which one it was. But she taught me two things in that. One was we did a huge amount of personal contact, went to train stations, went to people's doors, but we also did what I guess you would call relational organizing, went to the farmer's market, went to a playground. We met people where they were. So that was the first thing. The second thing was, those of you who may remember or have read, 80 was horrible. It was, we lost the Senate, we lost many of our most important figures in Democratic politics, but we held on to some key races. And the race I worked on, I think President Carter lost a district by almost 100,000 votes. And those relationships we built during that campaign, he held on to that seat for years. So that's really very important. And we're going to have a tough year. This is going to be a tough year. But if you look about it in the long run, winning a key House seat, winning a key Senate seat is going to make a difference. But I really just want to underscore how critical these governor's races are. There's 16 governors who are Democratic seats and 20 GOP seats. And we've got opportunity to pick up in Maryland and Massachusetts with Governor Hogan and Governor Baker. But if I were to say, if you want to do something that is really key to the future of this country, I go to Michigan, I go to Wisconsin, I go to Pennsylvania. And those are the governorships that we lost in 2010 that I think and came home to bite us in 2016. And really made a difference when Trump was able to win. And that I just think I would just put a shout out for governor's races.
I see there are two other hands up, but I wanted to integrate what's been said about all the races because they're nested one in another, where there are down ballot from the Senate. First of all, we now hang on, and people may have heard that Ben Ray Lujan has just had a stroke. He seems to be doing better, but when you hang on to the Senate in a 50-50 Senate with the vice president making the difference, every vote counts. We have a chance of picking up 2 seats. There are the toss-up. I want to explain mention how the Senate, governors, congressional, secretaries of state, and the election officials in the state, the thousands of local election officials who will be up, all are important, and for us to encourage people even to run for those offices. There's an overlap of many of these most important races, ones that Marvin started to mention. Just for some of them, this is not a complete list, but amongst the priority races on the Senate, and then I'm going to say for the governorships, it's Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, New Hampshire. All of those are democratically held now, and we have to retain them. It means the Republicans on their side will be fighting with each other in a contested primary, whereas we have a candidate to move forward. There's an open seat in Pennsylvania. There's a Republican running in the seat that he's had in Wisconsin. Marvin also mentioned North Carolina, Florida, Ohio, and Missouri also have prime toss-up races. On the governor's side, amongst the where there's races for governor that fit into where there are races for the Senate, in Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, and possibly Michigan and Kansas. Definitely Michigan and Kansas. They're under incredible attack. And the Republican side, again, has conflicts. So it's incredibly important to consider that operation. And then I think it was Jenny who said, and we've got to build ongoing operations year round. Both the NGOs, the outside organizations, and also the party operations increasingly reflect very strong party operations in many of these states. The head of the state party in Wisconsin was the DC director of Move On for a number of years. Marvin's already talked about the extraordinary operation in Georgia, where the head of the state party is now also, Marvin, she's also the member of Congress from John Lewis's old seat. Is that right?
Yeah. That's
And it's an integrated effort. Marvin's really emphasized that with me about one of the reasons that it really worked. The woman who's the head of the Arizona State Democratic Party, Raquel Tehran, I worked with her. I was a strategic advisor in the immigration reform campaign. She was the leader of the rapid response effort on immigration reform. She worked with Mi Familia Vota. She's also a state senator. So that there are, just to give you a sense of, there is organizational apparatus, not every place, but that we want to leave this call giving you a sense. Yes, it is a challenging time. And yes, the party that's in power often has less engagement. But if we have the engagement, there is definitely a path forward. There are ways to win, and it really is up to us. I saw there were several hands up. I wanted to turn it back. Danielle, did you have another comment to make? No.
So we are at time. I think everybody feels engaged and we can probably stay on for a few more minutes. Are there any more last questions for the panelists? Ali Feldman, you commented a lot in the chat. I wonder if there was something you wanted to say out loud to the group. You've shared a lot of great information in the chat if folks haven't seen it.
Hi, thank you. No, thank you for calling on me. I found this to be really, really helpful and appreciate everybody's time and willingness to share and have this conversation. I don't usually comment so much in the chat, but I happen to be in Pennsylvania and well aware, and hopefully the information I shared is other people find to be helpful as well. But thank you for inviting me to ask any questions or comment.
By the way, Ernie Powell just texted me, and he's been working on seniors issues for many years, starting work from the farm workers and continuing now. Ernie, did you have a final comment, final short way to frame what we've been discussing? Ernie?
Yes, I do. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, I'll be very succinct. We can win this with the senior vote. We can win the midterms, and we can win every general we want to with the senior vote. The most popular programs in government are senior programs: Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. For the last many, many years, the Republicans have been trying to cut it, destroy them, shift them, sabotage it, et cetera, et cetera. This is not an advertisement for my organization, which is Social Security Works, nor for myself, but we need to look. I would encourage all of my colleagues here on this phone, and Heather's heard this a lot from me, to learn those issues and begin to use them properly and to use them as campaign issues, because they're real, they're important, and in some cases, we will be saving lives.
As a senior, I thank you so much. Remember that also all of these points that we've been raising, it is up to us to take them and drive them forward.
Heather, this is William McNary. You just permit me the opportunity just to say, wow, this has just been great. It is always so nice to see the folks that you love together. And so I thank you for organizing this. You all are three powerhouses and have given us some great information. I was at I start off a speech by saying, but Reverend James Lawson once said, where there is no vision, the people perish. Then he ended up saying, where there is vision, the people flourish. And then he said, where the people flourish, peace, justice, and democracy can prevail. So it takes three things to win any campaign like this. Number one, it takes a disciplined message. So we've got to get our wisdom and be disciplined about it. The second thing is passion, because passion will give us a reason to keep going. It gives us lets people know that we have something in common with them. And finally, it takes unity. It's not necessarily the hardest part, but as Heather said earlier, sometimes when we're in conflict, it's hard for us to hold our unity, but we've got to do it because the forces that unite us are deep rooted and that we're greater than the forces that keep us divided. Y'all called it relational organizing, which is the first time I heard that today. That means that we seek to enlist those who are like us, who share our values, because they are looking to us to take people out of ignorance and poverty and disorder and into a world of unity, or ordered unity, where there is peace, justice, and democracy. So a little bit less Descartes and a little bit more Harriet Tubman, a little bit less I think, therefore I am, and a little bit more, let's walk together, children, and don't get weary. I am so confident. I spent 9 years of my life in Topeka, Kansas, and Bob Dole was my senator. And he once said he was the most optimistic man in America. But Bob Dole is gone, and so I have taken on the mantle. I am now the most optimistic man in America. And I do believe with these forces on this call, with all this information, if we don't win, that is our own fault. So thank you so much for just pumping me up and inspiring me.
A great way to take us out. What a great conversation. Thank you all for joining us after.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, Suzanne, and thank you for Turner for setting this up. It really, I think it was enjoyable for everybody, but I think those of us in the panel particularly enjoyed the conversation and the exchange of ideas.
Terrific. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
And thanks for that strong ending.
Right.
Yes, indeed.
There is no closer like William McNary, I'll tell you that much.
Oh,
Good to see
maybe
you,
we
brother.
can all unmute and give applause to the panelists.
Yeah.
Yay.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.
Got this.
All right.
Good night, everyone.
Night.
That was
Bye-bye.
awesome. Thank you, everyone.